Alright, we've got this bad boy taken apart as far as I plan on taking it apart. I know in the video it looked like I just pulled these shelves or drawers out, but it actually had a tab system that I had to use to release all the drawers to get them to pop out. I'm not sure if this is a common size or style, but one thing you'll have to look at is those drawers don't just pull out. Normally they have some sort of latch or a lever that releases them. So now we have it all torn apart as best that I'm going to do. I think I need to start cleaning it up, making sure that I get any sort of dirt, dust, cobwebs, anything like that off. And then we'll go from there. So, I think my plan is to do this in several pieces. I'm actually going to not do the back. I had originally planned on doing the back, but I decided that's kind of wasteful, and vinyl's kind of expensive. So, we'll be doing this side panel in one piece that'll also catch this little chamfered edge. You can see right here there's a break in the parts, so I'll probably put a seam there. We'll have a small strip that covers here, a small strip that covers here, and then we'll have that side just like this. I'm hoping that will leave me more than enough to do this cabinet front and the fronts of all the toolboxes. But for now, I think I'm just going to try to do this one side and see how it goes. Ideally, I would take this lock mechanism out, but it kind of seems like it would be a little bit of a pain in the rear. So we're just going to have to work around that, which sucks, but it is what it is. One thing that I think I can think about is up here at the top, we have our black top piece. So I think that we've got a little bit of wiggle room here so that we can leave a little bit of a gap and you won't be able to see it. This edge here has this lip that is kind of curved over. I cleaned it out the best I could, but that might be a little tricky. And then there is a lot more rust pitting and stuff than I expected. If this was something I really wanted to look nice and I cared about, I would go through and sand or grind all of these little rough patches down. When we put our vinyl wrap on, it's probably going to leave a little bit of texture, but I think there's enough going on with the wrap and the design that you're not going to see these little spots. So I guess the next step now is start doing some measuring and cut me up a strip to cover up this section. I think I'll definitely need to cut the piece a little bigger than I need, so I have a little extra, so I have room to pull on the wrap to pull it tight. So I'm going to do a little bit of measuring off camera real quick, and then we'll get to cutting vinyl. Do you guys ever run into a situation where you know you have the tools to do something, and you spend an hour looking for those tools, and you can't find them? That's where I'm at right now. So I know for a fact that I have a squeegee with the microfiber end and gloves to help with the install on this. I don't know where they went. Not a clue. Not a single clue. So we're gonna make do with the wrong tools so we can get started on this. So I couldn't find a squeegee, but I have an unused putty knife, plastic, and a microfiber. Look at that. It's the same thing. You could probably use something like a credit card or something like that as well, but this seems like a better route for me. So I'm gonna go this route. I don't know if it's necessary, but I've also got some glass cleaner that I'm gonna use to spray on this anytime I squeegee, just so that it's got an extra lubrication and I don't chance scratching anything up. But I think step one is just going to be to peel half of this cover off that side and make sure it's lined up at the bottom as best I can and start laying this down. So let's see what happens. So we can see it's leaving a lot of little bubbles and wrinkles, but most of the bubbles just go away with a little bit of pressure. There's also these wrinkles, which do not seem to come out quite as easy, but I'm not terribly worried about it, this just being a practice session. And I'm also not so sure which of these are bubbles and which of these are actually little rust pit spots. So it's kind of difficult to tell, but I'm basically just gonna keep rubbing any bubbles or anything that I see until we've got a nice smooth surface. Okay, so now we've got us a heat gun, and we're just gonna see what happens with a little heat. All right, so the first section is done. As a whole, relatively happy with it. I'm glad that I did this because there are a lot of flaws that I've seen. Like I said, it's hard to tell whether this, you know, here, for instance, that's obviously rust. There's nothing I can do about that. So I'm assuming most of these are also that. But as a whole, pretty good. And I think I've learned a lot just doing this section. So by the time I've got the toolbox done, we'll be doing all right. One thing I needed to pay attention to more is I didn't leave myself enough extra on this side. So you can see there's that little bit of a white line, which is the edge of the vinyl. I think I'm gonna have to come back in and see how that looks if I fill it with a Sharpie, and I think that'll hide that pretty well. But for now, we have half of a toolbox done in this cool hex grid pattern thing. So I'd say it's an improvement, and like I said, it's practice for when we do the car. One thing that I think is gonna be easier is the flat surfaces, surprisingly easy to deal with. Once I started getting into these edge pieces, and like here, I destroyed this. So we may just have to get a black piece and cover this up and do something to hide that mistake. But I don't have enough vinyl or enough care to redo this whole thing because of that one little section. So that's this side. I think next we'll... So since I don't care about this so much, I think ideally I would want to put all the drawers back in and try to match all of these hex patterns so it's one clean look, but I don't care that much, and that seems like a lot of work. So I'm just gonna flip this over, do the same thing we did on this side to this side. Remember how I said that I didn't care about the patterns not matching front to side? I changed my mind. I did. I'm glad I did. It only took me maybe half an hour to measure all of this stuff out, but now we have our strips cut for each little section here on the front. Each one of these will go on its corresponding drawer, and then we'll have the front done. So I think that was well worth it. Let's get to covering some of this up. Alright, so these were probably the two most difficult parts. They're back together. Turned out pretty good. Again, lots of this is, you could tell, rust underneath, which is kind of a bummer. I should have known, this being a black-based vinyl, it would have shown all that a little worse than I'd expected, but when you're zoomed out and you're far away from it, it's not that big a deal. And it seems to only have these rusty bits on the lower section of the toolbox. So I think that that's not really going to show up. Most people aren't going to notice that. So, man, we're getting there. I definitely need to focus a little bit more on cutting and lining stuff up right. This was a little tricky because I took measurements and cut from measurements. Luckily, on this, we should be able to just roll the entire sheet out on top of it, lay everything out, and then do all of our cutting after the fact. So it should come out a lot cleaner. But for now, these two sections are done. I have all of the toolbox front faces cut. I'm going to go ahead and put those on off camera because it's just more of the same thing. So once we have the front all finished, we'll jump over to the side and then we can put this thing back together. We have our drawers put back in. I'll probably end up taking them back out, but I wanted to go ahead and get the general layout on these pieces. So as you can see, I cut them a little short, so I have some flexibility here. I'll probably be biased towards the bottom because when you're looking at it from here, the handle covers up, you know, that little gap there. So they're pretty well all lined up. They're off a little bit because when you cut something in one spot and then introduce a, you know, 1/4 inch gap between them, I'm noticing the further up this side we get, you know, here it's lined up relatively well and it starts to get off and then it gets even further off, and by the time you get up to here it doesn't match at all. So it's not a big deal. It kind of stinks, but in the grand scheme of things, this is going to be pretty nice. So I'm going to go ahead and slide all of these off. I'm going to clean all of these surfaces so that we can get to installing these things. Right, I've gotten the majority of these done. We're down to the final drawer and then this upper top section. So I thought that I would actually go through and explain a little bit more about what I'm doing. I've never used vinyl wrap before. I tried once on a hood and it went poorly and I had to rip it off and throw it away. So I was scared to try it again. I'm glad that I gave it another shot. I don't know, I must have bought cheap vinyl because this stuff is super easy to work with. I've always thought about these as like stickers, and once you get a bubble in there, there's not much that you can do. You've got to start trying to peel it up and push the air out. But man, you can get some big bubbles in this, and it just rubs out with your finger. I am super impressed, and I'm very glad that I did this. I got this from Metro Restyling. It looks like it's one of their personal prints. I will definitely be using it again. It has been great. So, my trick that I've learned here is if I prop up the drawer, that gives me room to work on my edges here. And it would help if you guys could see. That'd be cool, right? So, I first make sure that I have everything lined up. I want my patterns to match the drawer below it. I have it faced the right way. So I start by tearing half of this backing cover off. That should make it a lot easier to work with. Oops, did that backwards. I give it a nice crease so when I get to the end it'll sit down where it needs to. I line things up the best that I can. Another thing is this looks like it's very difficult to get unstuck once you have it down. But as long as you haven't put any pressure on it, it seems to pull up relatively easy. So I start here in the center and hold down the center. That way I know the center section has no bubbles. And then I've learned it's just as easy for me to use my fingers. Normally I would be wearing a glove, but as I said, I couldn't find them. And you just kind of work your way through it. Any area you see a bubble, you work it out. usually the heat from your hand and the pressure from your fingers is enough to get it done. The one thing that stinks about this, and I've said it a million times, is there are a lot more little rust pits than I thought. And no amount of rubbing that's going to get it out, because it's actually the surface of the toolbox, not the vinyl. So here, I've been clipping the corners. It lets it fold up and under a lot easier. And you've probably noticed that I hit the edges with the heat gun. So my thought here, after all of the videos that I've watched and working with it, is that when you hit this edge, you can see, and you'll see it better when I do that side, it actually takes a lot of the fingers and the wrinkles out. The phrase that they use, everybody seems to use, is tension. So if you hit it with heat, you get your edges down on the top surface. Then you hit it with the heat and it releases that tension so that it won't have the desire to pull itself back up in the future. It makes sense working with it once you see what it does and you've messed with it. Explaining it, I've never quite understood what people meant when they talk about that, but working with it, it now makes sense. So I've also learned that this method works pretty well, being a narrow strip like this, is I can just put this in position and slide out our piece here. See how easily that bubble comes out? I believe that this is one of those vinyls. The vinyl itself actually has some pores in it, so that when you press down, it allows the air bubble to come through the vinyl instead of having to be pushed out the edge. And as long as you don't have a major bubble, like see here, that didn't quite work. No big deal. You just kind of pull it up. And you can see how it like wants to keep that shape like it's been stretched. And then when you hit it with the heat, it relaxes that. And you'll see that it comes back to being perfectly level and smooth. And now I have learned you don't want to get this warm and pull it. If you get it warm and pull it, it stretches so easy and seems to warp everything. And of course, the one that I show you guys how to do in detail is the only one that I have issues with. But don't panic. This has been super easy. You can peel and stick this as many times as you need. It doesn't seem to be losing adhesion or anything like that. So there we go. And now we can just roll our edge over. And this thing should be locked to this toolbox drawer, and I don't have to worry about it ever starting to lift off around the edges or peel up or anything like that. Again, not the smoothest because of the surface of our toolbox, but man, I think that's coming out very, very nice. And we'll get a better idea of what it looks like once it's back on the ground and everything. But taking the extra time to make sure these patterns was lined up, man, that was a very, very good decision. Because that would have looked terrible if those weren't even remotely close. But you can see, I didn't spend enough time to get all of this perfect, but they're close enough, especially once you start looking from the top view. And you can see all of that red. That looks like that'll be showing, but if you come from this side, we have our drawer handles, which of course are also red on top. It's okay. That's why I went with a red color. Our toolbox fully vinyl wrapped, put back together, cleaned up a little bit, and I'm gonna say I'm pretty happy with it. Quality wise, probably a 5 or a 6 out of 10. I should have taken more time with my cuts. I should have ordered more vinyl. I was trying too hard to cut the piece perfect before I put it on, and it's very, very, very difficult to make that work. So in the future, I'll order more vinyl, more than I think I need, and then some, and that way I'll be able to stretch it fully to cover all of the edges so you don't see any cut lines or anything like that. And I now know how important surface prep is and surface finish is, because the biggest issue with this whole thing, minus the cut lines and being able to see edges, is that all of those pitting, all of those pits showed up. So either way, I'm happy with it. It was a really good first attempt, and I now have a better understanding of how vinyl works, how to apply it, and the toolbox actually looks a heck of a lot cooler than it used to. So let's check it out. there's one thing that I can take out of this whole project, or that you can take out of this project, is go out there and try it. I think I might be in this maybe $100 in vinyl, and I couldn't think of a better thing to practice on. It's a flat, smooth surface, which for the most part when we do our Volvo roof is also a huge flat surface. But it also has, you know, my particular toolbox has some complex curve here. Like I said, plenty of things I could have done better. This keyhole, I should have prepped better and had a plan for that. The tops of all of the drawers are red, but so are all of the insides and everything like that. So I don't think that's a huge deal to me. Again, it's a toolbox. Not very many people are gonna see this anyway, but I'm super happy that I tried it. I'm now way more confident in being able to do a project like this. So if you want to try it, try it. Toolboxes are universal. You may have a smaller toolbox, which makes this even cheaper and probably easier. But for $100 to take my toolbox from just plain red with some discoloration and scratches and stuff like that to this, I mean, that's cool. It's cool. I like it. I like it. I'm happy with the way it came out. So that's it for this one. Hopefully, here before too much longer, we'll be able to do our vinyl wrap on the roof of our wagon here. But until then, I'll see you later.